Welcome to another video of Geo Spinach. Today we're going to analyze pin down in warfare. What does it mean and why it's important for us to understand it. We're going to use military examples on a tactical map to illustrate what does it mean on the divisional level, regimental and brigade level, on the platoon and company level, and when it comes to squad operations. Lastly, we're going to look at the psychological impact of being pinned down. So, firstly, what's the idea of pinning down the enemy? How is it done? Well, the way you pin down the enemy is firstly by mainly use infantry and your artillery. You can use it with armor as well, but it's not recommended for on a strategic level because the main idea is to hold the enemy in place and not to let him retreat. And then you move on to engage the enemy and attack across the front line. Now, the defendant has the option of you force the defendant to give battle, so to defend the territory he is holding. If he retreats, so if he chooses this path over here, he will end up having a lot of casualties because any retreat can easily move and traverse into a route and thus result to high casualties. If he decides to stay put and you attack on a front without having the necessary firepower and breakthrough to break the enemy line, then most likely you are going to receive disproportionately more casualties. But that's not necessarily bad because the concept of pinning down the enemy is not to gain ground, but to allow your other units to conduct a bigger operation. And here is the juice of the whole idea. If the defenders do not retreat and they do stick to their defensive positions and you do receive more casualties, the act of pinning down the enemy will allow your other forces to break through. For example, in this front here, the units that are lying over here, for example, this is on the army group level, are pinning down the enemy. What does it mean? It means they are generally launching attacks. The same happens with here. Even if you don't have the necessary numbers, you just attack the enemy with the main purpose not to allow him to leave, and thus your armor, in most instances, being able to exploit the situation. A better example of this is here, where your infantry units, as I draw them over here, your infantry units will gradually move in and attack the enemy's infantry. In most instances, here, when the combat occurs, they are not likely to actually break the enemy's lines, especially in these three situations over here where let's say the three brigades, the three regiments attacking, are of equal strength to the defender, and the defender always has the advantage. As a result, they will not be able to actually break the line, but the concept of pinning them down is not allowing those regiments to be able to withdraw to better defensive positions. The act of not allowing the enemy to withdraw is the act of pinning them down. And here it's done of these two regiments attacking the single regiments on the other side with the purpose of damaging them as well as holding them down while the armor in the back pushes into a massive assault. And that's why you need to pin down when it comes to the army group and divisional level. Again, we see this example as this operation progresses over here, over here, over here, over here, and most importantly, over here. The idea is that those two regiments, so regiment let's say 1 and regiment 2, have not fully engaged combat and they could have been able to retreat to deal with the situation in the north. Thus, the black team will focus on pinning them down, so engaging them in mass attack, not allowing them to retreat. So what do we mean practically by engaging them in mass attack? Now we move into the actually platoon and company level. So company level of like 250 men will set up machine guns in various positions, have artillery support, fire at the enemy, and gradually move in. The idea is not to directly assault the enemy, but to challenge the enemy to start engaging them back. So you force the enemy into defensive positions, and by forcing them into defensive positions, you are preventing them from retreating. And as you prevent them from retreating, you get the aforementioned result we mentioned prior. Now, if they choose to retreat, that's where a pin down attack can transform into an assault. An assault is where you commit the whole battalion in this situation to eliminate the defender that's retreating. Again, this might develop for the defender to be routed. The idea that the firepower you receive from the defender as the attacker will decrease as the defender tries to retreat, and thus your precision per firepower increases, and thus your firepower killing capacity massively increases. And thus in that situation you launch an assault. Now, if the defenders do not choose to retreat, then you tend to accumulate way more casualties than the defender, but you do not actually commit all of your troops to the attack. And we're going to see a practical example of this. So here we have, for example, the regiment. So we have the regiment over here, and let's just zoom in to see what happens. So we have the regiment over here, which has its 3 battalions spread out. It has 2 extra mortar companies as well as 1 anti-tank company, let's say as reinforcements over here, and they're spread out in a generally 2-line defensive, static defensive system. Both units are infantry-based units, so nothing special there. Now, the idea is that the black team are preparing and they're launching their pinning down operation. That implies that with the black line, they are launching an assault, so they're launching an assault over here, while with the dotted lines, those companies are pinning them down, so they're firing specifically on them. Later on, we're going to get into the details of how that is done on the squad level. While this is done, the artillery support on the regimental or on the divisional level provides artillery support over here as to masquerade what is actually happening and to reduce the counter firepower of the attacker. At the same time, while this whole thing is happening, the defendant will also fire back. It's not that they were just going to stay still. But the main idea, as you can observe here, is not to generally assault the enemy, but to pin them down and to challenge them into firing back and not retreating. As the operation progresses and they start to overrun the first rearguard actions, so the ones in the front were rearguard actions, and they will start engaging the main forces. At this point of the operation, the black team will start accumulating disproportionately more forces than the red team. If the red team does decide to withdraw from the battlefield, in its attempt to withdraw from the battlefield, it will give the black team the advantage and the initiative to launch a massive assault across the front line, and as a result overrun many of the units attempting to flee. On the other hand, if the red team decides not to retreat, but on the other hand decides to fight and provide direct defense and firepower on the enemy, because the attacker is not in good defensive positions and they're infantry based, attacking on an open terrain, the attacker will start to accumulate way more casualties. And we come to a situation like this where the black team is gradually engaging the enemy, but they are not truly committing to the assault, and they are trying to keep their distance from the enemy, because as the closer as they come, while the defendant is not retreating, because of the good quality of the defensive positions of the defendant, they will receive more casualties. In more practical sense, any artillery fire on the red units will cause disproportionately more casualties than artillery firepower on the red units. The main reason is because red units are in well dug in defensive positions. Now, if we zoom in on the company level and we see how the operation there develops, the pinning down operation. So here is how an assault happens. So in this specific instance, we don't have a pinning down operation, but an assault. But within an assault, you require a pin down operation. Now, to conduct such operation on the squad level, of course, this is also done by infantry tanks and can be done by many other means, even with electronic warfare, smoke screen, rolling barrages, and so forth. I'm not going to get into so much technicalities. The main idea is that the fire and maneuver idea is based on pinning down the enemy, where few troops are attacking and literally firing their machine guns at one position, while other troops are gradually moving into better positions, and then they fire again and they start to get closer to the enemy to overrun him. And then they come to a position where they are close enough to launch their grenades, smoke, or higher firepower, so submachine guns, and then two possible outcomes occur. The enemy gets overrun, so those units that the defendants that get assaulted panic and get routed, and as a result they receive massive casualties and they retreat, the remaining of them retreat, or the assault completely fails and the attacking force receives quite a lot of casualties. And let's see a direct example of this. So we have a situation like this. So here we have 3 platoons. So that company we referred to prior, and let's assume they also have some mortar support, artillery support from mortars. For the ones that don't know, mortars are infantry-based, medium range artillery support. So big boom boom. So in this instance, the dots will resemble the squads. So different squads. Yes, there are units, platoons that are divided in 3 squads. Others are divided in 5 squads. I divided into 5 just to illustrate the point. Each army literally divides it based on whatever it cares. There's no specifics on it. Here I start to show the specifics of the terrain. So the grayish that I show over here, for example, over here is like some sort of a tree or bushy area or a dug-in position that soldiers can take cover, and the area over here is maybe a bit of a hilly terrain or a dugout, anything that troops can use to cover. The first maneuver is for the platoon to move in to those defensible positions over here, and at the same time the other squads to fire on the enemy over here along with the mortar support, and thus pinning them down. And that's the idea, putting them down, so not allowing the defendants to fire back, and thus reducing the defendants' firepower monetarily. Concept of firepower is very, very important here, and you can check my video on that specifically. The idea is to reduce the enemy firepower to allow your units to move into better positions. As your units move into better positions, then those units on the better positions, since they are closer to the enemy and their accuracy level has increased, then they start providing the firepower on the enemy positions over here, over here, over here, over here, over here, and so forth, while the rest of the squads moving to better positions. And as the battle develops, again, the units provide fire, and then the squads assault. Of course, again, if the whole unit decides to stay firm, the outcome of the battle is that the majority of the squads that will actually commit to the assault, so for example these squads and these squads and these squads, will maybe be able to push the red team away and even capture a territory, for example over here, so capture all of this territory, but the end result is for them to have received way more casualties than the defendant. So for the overall regiment, the pinning down action, if the defender decides to defend, will be disastrous or partially disastrous. The main idea you conduct the pinning down operation on the divisional level is to help the rest of your army. The way you conduct it on the battalion and the company level is to allow a different battalion to move in to better positions. And again, the same applies on the squad level. Some squads provide fire support while others move in to take a position. Of course, when you cannot here, you can go into individual soldiers where each soldier has the machine gunner positions, the other one provides the grenade launcher, and then you go to the individual concept of pinning down. It's quite an easy concept to understand. And finally, let's see the psychological impact of being pinned down. And starting from the soldiers' combat, once you receive an artillery barrage and continuous infantry support, you have to understand that from the perspective of the defendant, and this doesn't apply only on pinning down, just the feeling of being under artillery support is quite scary, and especially for people that have not seen war. And this of course applies to myself as well. This applies in general in war. This leads to more fear, anxiety, stress, and panic. And the quality of the officer on the field and the non-commissioned officer, when it comes to NATO-based countries where the non-commissioned officer is more responsible for the individual soldier, that differs a bit in the German and the Russian School of Wars. Just for you Americans that you might not know this, it's up to them to maintain the morale and the quality of your troops. Now, this is my direct message to all of these corporals, sergeants, and low-ranking officers. You are the most important person on the battlefield just by being there and not showing fear. Being there side by side with your soldiers is the deciding factor of your unit collapsing or not. Then we go to the concept of, well, if you are pinned down at a specific moment, then you are truly unable to retreat. Imagine, for example, being in a ditch and receiving random infantry fire from small arms fire from a distance of 50 meters or so. Getting out of your foxhole and start running, it's quite a scary thing to do. So while you are getting pinned down, you start to get helpless, your morale massively decreases, and a prolonged exposure to such pinning down operations, which can be done, for example, by extensive artillery firepower, will deteriorate morale even further, which will end to a severe psychological impact on the soldiers, resulting to the soldiers going into a panic or just stop firing at the enemy completely. So even when the attacker stops or decreases the intensity of fire upon the defender the defender firepower's back has been massively decreased, allowing the attacker to then initiate an assault and gaining a position where originally it wouldn't have gotten that position. And that was the main idea of being pinning down, and the general concept of being pinned down, starting from the arming group, divisional, battalion level, and squad level. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. If you have any questions, any ideas for the videos that you like to see, please comment them below. Thank you for watching.